My brother said, "Mom and Dad should have stopped after me. You were just a mistake." My parents nodded. "We kept you out of obligation, not because we wanted you." The fork stopped halfway to my mouth when my brother Garrett said it. We were at Rosewood Inn, the country club restaurant my parents had been members of for 33 years, celebrating Garrett's promotion to senior partner at his law firm. White tablecloths, crystal wine glasses, the kind of place where conversations were supposed to stay pleasant and surface level. My mother had just finished telling some story about Garrett's childhood brilliance, how he'd read chapter books at age 4, how the teachers had called him gifted. Standard dinner conversation in our family. Then Garrett, 3 glasses of Pinot Noir deep and feeling expansive, White leaned back in his chair and said, "You know what's funny? Mom and Dad should have stopped after me. David was just a mistake." He said it with a laugh, like it was a joke we were all in on. I felt my face go hot, but I forced a smile, waiting for someone to shut him down. Waiting for my mother to say, "Garrett, that's terrible," or my father to tell him he'd had too much to drink. Instead, my mother set down her wine glass very carefully and said, "Well, that's not entirely inaccurate." The room tilted. My father nodded, not looking at me. "We kept you out of obligation, son. Not because we wanted another child. We thought it was the right thing to do." The waiter appeared with our entrees at that exact moment, setting down plates of duck confit and seared salmon while my entire world collapsed. I sat there, frozen, as he ground fresh pepper over my father's plate and asked if we needed anything else. My mother smiled at him. "We're fine, thank you." I'd been living in the same city as my parents for 28 years, seeing them for dinner at least twice a month, attending every family function, every holiday, every obligation. I'd thought we had a normal family dynamic. Not warm exactly. My parents had always been reserved, proper, more interested in appearances than emotions, but functional. I was the younger son by 6 years, always a little bit in Garrett's shadow, but I'd told myself that was natural. He was older, more accomplished, more confident. Of course he got more attention. I'd rationalized it my entire life. The birthday parties that were smaller for me than they'd been for him. However, the college fund that somehow ran out halfway through my degree, while Garrett had gotten a full ride plus living expenses. The way conversations at family gatherings always circled back to Garrett's achievements, while mine were acknowledged with polite nods before moving on. I'd told myself it was because he was the firstborn, because he was more successful, because I was reading too much into things. Now, sitting in that restaurant with duck confit going cold on my plate, I realized I'd been lying to myself for almost 3 decades. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened the voice recorder app, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I set it on the table next to my water glass, partially hidden by the napkin. "Say that again," I said quietly. My mother looked at me with something like annoyance. "David, now don't be dramatic. You're an adult. Surely you figured this out by now." "Figured what out?" My voice didn't sound like mine. Garrett was watching me with this expression I couldn't read. Not quite concern, not quite amusement. Clinical interest, maybe. Like I was a case study. "That you were unplanned," my father said, cutting into his duck. "Your mother and I had decided we were done having children. We had Garrett, our family was complete. Then your mother got pregnant despite precautions. And, well, we made a choice to go through with it." "Why?" The question came out raw. My mother sighed. "It was 1996. We were active in the church. Your father was running for city council. It would have looked bad." The recording app on my phone showed the waveform jumping with every word. I watched it, transfixed, as my mother continued. "See, we did our duty. We raised you, we fed you, we sent you to good schools. But don't confuse obligation with desire, David. We gave you what we owed you, nothing more." I left the restaurant without finishing dinner. Just stood up, pocketed my phone, and walked out while my family sat there in silence. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking so violently I couldn't get the key in the ignition. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, listening to the recording I just made, making sure it was clear, making sure I hadn't imagined it. My mother's voice came through perfectly. "Don't confuse obligation with desire, David. We gave you what we owed you, nothing more." I drove home on autopilot. My apartment was in a converted warehouse downtown, 1 bedroom, minimal furniture. The kind of place a 28-year-old graphic designer could afford on a mediocre salary. I'd always felt vaguely ashamed of it when my parents visited, comparing it mentally to Garrett's 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with a professionally landscaped yard. Now I looked around at my space, my books, my art prints, my secondhand furniture, and felt something shift. This was mine. I'd earned every piece of it. Nobody had given it to me out of obligation. I opened my laptop and started making a list. Not of feelings, not of grievances, but of facts. Concrete, documentable facts. The college fund discrepancy. Garrett had received $120,000 for his education. I'd received $52,000 before my parents said the fund was depleted. I'd had to take out student loans for my final 2 years. I'd never questioned it before. Garrett had gone to a more expensive school, I'd told myself. It made sense. But now I pulled up my old financial aid records and did the math. Even accounting for Garrett's pricier education, the numbers didn't add up. There should have been at least $80,000 left for me. Where had the other $28,000 gone? If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The inheritance my grandmother had left. She died when I was 15, and I'd been told she'd left everything to my parents, to be distributed as they saw fit. Garrett had gotten a car for his 21st birthday, paid for with Grandma's gift. I'd gotten a $500 check for mine. I'd assumed the inheritance had been unequal, that Grandma had favored Garrett. But I'd never seen the actual will, the Christmas presents, and I started going through old photos on my phone, pictures from the past decade of Christmases. In every single one, the pile of gifts in front of Garrett was noticeably larger than mine. I told myself he just had more people buying him presents, that he was better at maintaining relationships. Now I counted. Same number of tags from Mom and Dad on his pile as on mine. But his boxes were bigger, wrapped in better paper, clearly more expensive. I created a spreadsheet. Column A, event. Column B, what Garrett received. Column C, what I received. Column D, discrepancy. By midnight, I had 32 rows of data spanning 28 years. The pattern was undeniable. My phone rang at 8 the next morning. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Then Garrett called. Then my father. Well, I listened to each voicemail once, saved them, and didn't respond. My mother's message, David, you embarrassed us last night. Walking out like that was incredibly rude. Call me so we can discuss your behavior. Garrett's message, hey man, look, I think we all had too much to drink. Let's just forget last night happened, okay? Mom's pretty upset. Give her a call. My father's message, son, your mother is waiting for an apology. The sooner you handle this, the better. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them acknowledged what they'd said. They were calling to manage me, to smooth things over, to return to the status quo where I accepted less and didn't complain. I blocked all 3 numbers. Then I called in sick to work and made an appointment with a lawyer. The firm I chose was deliberately not Garrett's. I found Theodore Ashford through online reviews, family law specialist, 23 years of practice, reputation for being thorough and unsentimental. His office was in a converted bank building, all dark wood and leather chairs. He was maybe 60, with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around his neck. I told him everything. The restaurant conversation, the recording, the financial discrepancies I documented. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. What is it you want, Mr. Reeves? I hadn't expected the question. I want, I don't know, justice, acknowledgement. Those aren't legal remedies. He was blunt, but not unkind. I can't make your parents love you retroactively. One, I can't sue them for emotional neglect. That's not actionable unless we're talking about minor children in danger, which you weren't. What I can do is examine the financial aspects of your relationship with your family and determine if there's been any misappropriation of funds that were legally owed to you. He pulled out a client intake form. I'll need copies of everything. Your grandmother's will, documentation of the college funds, any trusts or accounts that were supposed to be for your benefit, bank statements if you have them, and I'll need a retainer of $3,500 to start the investigation. I thought about my savings account. I had maybe $8,000 total, money I'd been saving for a new car. How long will this take? Depends on what we find. Could be a few weeks, could be months. But Mr. Reeves, I want you to understand something. And if we pursue this, your relationship with your family will be permanently damaged. There's no coming back from accusing your parents of financial impropriety, even if we prove it. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the restaurant, the casual cruelty, the 3 of them sitting there, united, while I absorbed the blow alone. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. I gave him the retainer that afternoon. Then I went home and started gathering documents. My grandmother's obituary mentioned that she'd left a generous estate to her beloved family. I requested a copy of the will from the county probate court. It took 3 days to arrive, and when I opened the envelope, my hands were shaking again. The will was clear. My grandmother had left her entire estate, valued at approximately $340,000, to be divided equally between her two grandchildren, a Garrett and me. The money was to be held in trust by our parents until we each turned 25, at which point we would receive full access to our shares. I'd turned 25 3 years ago. I'd never received a trust fund. I'd never even known one existed. I called Theodore immediately. They stole from me. My voice was shaking. My parents stole my inheritance. Don't use that word yet, Theodore said calmly. Bring me the will. Let me examine the trust documentation. There could be legitimate explanations. But there weren't. Theodore requested the trust documents from the bank where they'd been held. It took 2 weeks and a subpoena. But we finally got them. The trust had been dissolved when I was 23, 2 years before I was supposed to receive it. The distribution paperwork showed my signature on the dissolution forms, except I'd never signed anything. I'd never even known about the trust. I stared at the signature on the document. It looked like mine, similar enough that a casual observer wouldn't question it. But I knew I hadn't written it. The loops were wrong. The pressure was different. That's not my signature, I told Theodore. He put the document in a plastic sleeve. Then we have a problem. A legal problem. Forgery. Potentially fraud. This is no longer just a family dispute, Mr. Reeves. This is criminal. We took the signature to a forensic document examiner, Dr. Helen Morrissey, who testified in fraud cases for 15 years. She analyzed it for 3 days, comparing it to known samples of my handwriting from old checks, birthday cards, anything I could find. Her report was definitive. The signature on the trust dissolution form dated March 2021 shows characteristics inconsistent with the known handwriting samples of David Reeves. The pressure patterns, letter formations, and flow dynamics suggest simulation. Someone attempting to copy Mr. Reeves's signature rather than Mr. Reeves signing naturally. In my professional opinion, this signature is a forgery. I read the report 3 times. Someone in my family had forged my signature to steal $170,000 from me. Theodore filed a police report. The detective assigned to the case was an older man named Frank Kowalski, 32 years on the force, most of them in financial crimes. He came to Theodore's office to interview me, bringing a younger partner whose name I immediately forgot. The detective Kowalski had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed. Walk me through the family dynamics, he said, after I'd explained the trust situation. So I did. The restaurant conversation, the lifetime of differential treatment, the financial discrepancies, the forged signature. He took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I mentioned the recording from the restaurant, he stopped me. You have them on tape saying you were unwanted? I pulled out my phone and played it for him. My mother's voice filled the quiet office. We kept you out of obligation, son. Not because we wanted another child. Garrett's laugh. Mom and Dad should have stopped after me. David was just a mistake. Detective Kowalski's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. That's cold. His partner, no child over another, which supports the child over another, which supports the theory that they would be willing to steal from David to benefit Garrett or themselves. Detective Kowalski requested the bank records for the trust dissolution. Where had the money gone when the trust was dissolved? The bank provided statements showing that $170,000 had been transferred from my trust account to my parents' joint checking account on March 15th, 2021. From there, the money trail got more complicated. $85,000 had been transferred to an account in Garrett's name 3 days later. Another $60,000 had gone to paying off the mortgage on my parents' house. Worse, they gave half of it to your brother and $3,000 there, gradually absorbed into my parents' general finances over the following months. They gave half of it to your brother and used the rest for themselves, Detective Kowalski said flatly. That's theft by deception at minimum, potentially felony fraud depending on how the DA wants to charge it. I felt sick. What happens now? Now I bring your parents in for questioning. I'll need you to make a formal statement, sign some documents. Then we build the case. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Reeves. Financial crimes like this, especially within families, they're complicated to prosecute. Your parents will claim it was a misunderstanding, that they thought they were acting in your best interest, that there was some verbal agreement. Their lawyer will make it messy. But the signature is forged, I said. We have proof. We have an expert opinion that the signature is likely forged. Likely isn't definitely in court. But combined with the recording showing their bias, the financial records showing the money trail, and your testimony that you never authorized the dissolution, yeah, we have a case. Whether the DA pursues it is another question. He stood up, gathering his notes. One more thing. Are you prepared for this to become public? Small city like ours, prominent family like yours. Your father was on city council. Your brother's a senior partner at a major firm. This will be news. I thought about it. The public humiliation. The exposure. Part of me wanted to shrink from it, to keep this private. Wanted to protect the family name even as the family had failed to protect me. Then I thought about the restaurant, about my mother's casual dismissal, about 28 years of being the afterthought, the obligation, the mistake. Let it be news, I said. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I didn't hear from my parents or Garrett directly, but I heard plenty through other channels. My Aunt Carolyn called, my mother's sister, asking what I thought I was doing, dragging the family through this ugliness. I asked her if she'd known about the trust. She went quiet. Your mother mentioned it once, years ago. She said you'd agreed to let them manage the money for you since you weren't good with finances. I never agreed to that. I never even knew the trust existed until last month. Another long silence. Oh, David. Oh, no. She sounded genuinely distressed. I'm so sorry. I believed her when she said you knew. She made it sound like you were all on the same page. Did she tell you they gave half the money to Garrett? I heard Aunt Carolyn start to cry. I have to go, she said, and hung up. I added her to the list of people who'd failed me, even if unintentionally. She'd taken my mother's word without question, never thinking to verify, never reaching out to me. The family narrative had been so strong, the idea that Garrett was the golden child and I was the lesser son so established, that even extended family had just accepted it. My ex-girlfriend from college, Melissa, reached out. We dated for 2 years before breaking up amicably when she'd moved across the country for grad school. We still followed each other on social media. I saw your brother's Facebook post, she wrote. What's going on? Are you okay? I hadn't seen Garrett's post. I pulled up his profile. I hadn't blocked him on social media yet, only on my phone. The post was from that morning. Dealing with some difficult family situations. Sometimes the people you love make choices that hurt everyone around them. Asking for privacy and prayers during this time. The comments were full of support. Praying for you, Garrett. Family can be so hard. You're such a strong person. Not one of them knew he was talking about me. Not one of them knew he'd received $85,000 of my stolen inheritance. I screenshotted the post and sent it to Theodore and Detective Kowalski with a note. Establishing narrative control. Theodore called me an hour later. That's actually helpful. He's making public statements about the situation, which means when the truth comes out, the contrast will be more dramatic. Let him dig himself in deeper. The detective work continued. Detective Kowalski interviewed my parents, and according to Theodore, who got the details secondhand, they'd brought their own lawyer. Not Garrett, interestingly, but someone from outside the family. Their story was exactly what Detective Kowalski had predicted. Yes, they dissolved the trust early, but they'd done it for my benefit. I'd been struggling financially, they claimed, and they'd used the money to help me. When Theodore told me this, I laughed. It was such an absurd lie. I never asked them for money. I never told them I was struggling. What evidence do they have? None, Theodore said. That's the point. They're hoping it comes down to he said, she said, your word against theirs. But the money didn't come to me. It went to them and to Garrett. They claimed the money went to paying off debts I'd accrued that I'd asked them to handle privately. Credit cards, medical bills, things I was embarrassed about. I felt my face go hot. That's a lie. I've never had credit card debt. I've never asked them to pay my bills. I can prove it. My credit report will show no delinquencies, no debt beyond my student loans. Then get me your credit report, Theodore said. I pulled it that afternoon. Clean credit history, no late payments, no collections, no evidence of the financial crisis my parents claimed had necessitated raiding my trust fund. We added it to the growing pile of evidence. The DA finally agreed to meet with us in early October. 3 months after that dinner at Rosewood Inn. Her name was Valerie Kincaid, 49 years old, former public defender turned prosecutor with a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime. She reviewed our evidence in silence. The forged signature, the expert's report, the financial records, the recording from the restaurant, my credit history, everything. When she finished, she looked at me directly. Mr. Reeves, I want to make sure you understand what pursuing this means. If I bring charges against your parents and brother, and yes, your brother received stolen money, which makes him potentially culpable, this will destroy your family. Relationships will end. Thanksgiving dinners will never happen again. You'll become the person who sent his parents to prison. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I'd been asked variations of this question so many times now, by Theodore, by Detective Kowalski, by well-meaning friends who thought I should just let it go and move on. But none of them had been in that restaurant. None of them had heard their mother say they'd been kept out of obligation. None of them had spent 28 years feeling like they didn't quite measure up, only to discover the whole system had been rigged against them from the start. They destroyed the relationship, I said quietly. Not me. They did this. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. Valerie Kincaid nodded slowly. Okay, then we proceed. I'm charging your parents with theft by deception and forgery. Your brother is in a gray area. Receiving stolen property requires knowledge that it was stolen, and he could claim he didn't know, unless we can prove otherwise. The recording, I said, from the restaurant. He knew I was the afterthought, the unwanted one. He was part of the whole dynamic. Would he really not question why he was getting $85,000 out of nowhere? That's circumstantial. It suggests knowledge, but doesn't prove it. She made a note. But it's worth exploring. Let me talk to him, see what he says. Sometimes people incriminate themselves when they think they're being clever. The charges were filed on a Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, it was all over local news. Prominent local attorneys' parents charged in trust fund theft. The story had everything. Money, betrayal, a successful family's dark secrets. My phone started ringing with numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, probably. I didn't answer. Lee Garrett called from a different number than I'd blocked. This time, I picked up. What the hell is wrong with you? He didn't even say hello. You're destroying Mom and Dad over money? Over a misunderstanding? It's not a misunderstanding. They forged my signature and stole $170,000 from me, then gave half of it to you. That money was used to help the family. Do you think Mom and Dad are rich? Do you know how much it costs to maintain the house, to keep up appearances, to support... He stopped himself. To support what? To support you? My voice was sharp. Because I never asked for support. I supported myself. I've been supporting myself since college. That money was mine, Garrett. Grandma left it to me. Grandma left it to both of us. And you got your half plus half of mine. How is that fair? There was a long silence. When Garrett spoke again, his voice was different, colder. You're going to regret this, David. You think you're the victim here, but you're just vindictive. You couldn't handle being the screw-up of the family, so now you're burning everything down. I'm not the screw-up, I said. I was just the one you all decided to treat like one. There's a difference. I hung up. 2 hours later, Garrett posted again on Facebook, this time more explicitly. My brother has chosen to pursue false criminal charges against our parents over a family financial matter. He's weaponizing the legal system because of personal resentment. Our parents did nothing wrong. They've asked me not to speak publicly about this, but I can't stay silent while they're being slandered. Anyone who knows our family knows what kind of people our parents are. The truth will come out. The post got hundreds of reactions and comments. The narrative was forming. Spoiled younger son makes false accusations against loving parents. I was being painted as the villain. I screenshotted the post and sent it to Valerie Kincaid. She called me within minutes. He shouldn't be posting about an active criminal case. I'm going to have a conversation with his lawyer about witness tampering and public statements that could prejudice a jury pool. Will it help? I asked. Will it make people believe me? Mr. Reeves, this isn't about making people believe you. This is about the evidence. The court doesn't care what Facebook thinks. But for what it's worth, I believe you. The evidence is clear. Your family did this to you, and now they're trying to gaslight the entire community into thinking you're crazy. I don't let them. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that dinner, about the casual way my mother had said, obligation, not desire, about how my entire childhood suddenly made sense through this new lens. The smaller birthday parties weren't about budget. The fewer presents weren't about what I deserved. The lack of support, the dismissiveness, the way my accomplishments were never quite celebrated, none of it was in my head. It was real. It had always been real. I'd just been too young, too desperate for their love, to see it clearly. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Raymond Foster, specialist in family trauma, 26 years in practice. He was the one who used the term scapegoat to describe my role in the family system. In dysfunctional family dynamics, there's often a golden child and a scapegoat, he explained during our third session. The golden child can do no wrong. The scapegoat is blamed for problems, receives less affection, less support. It's not about who the children actually are. It's about the roles the parents need them to fill. Why would parents need a scapegoat? I asked. Dr. Foster leaned back in his chair. Lots of reasons. Sometimes it's about unconscious resentment. Maybe they really didn't want a second child, and they punished you for existing. Sometimes it's about projecting their own failures onto someone. Sometimes one child just becomes the repository for all the family's dysfunction, which allows everyone else to feel functional by comparison. Your brother could be the success story because you were the cautionary tale. I thought about this. So it was never about me, about anything I did or didn't do. Correct. You could have been perfect, and it wouldn't have mattered. The role was assigned before you were old enough to understand what was happening. And once those roles solidify, they're very hard to break without completely leaving the system. I'm leaving the system, I said. I know. That's healthy. It's also incredibly difficult. You're grieving the family you wish you'd had while simultaneously fighting the family you actually have. That's a lot to carry. He was right. Some days I felt strong, righteous, clear about my decision. Other days I felt like a traitor, a family destroyer, the villain in Garrett's Facebook posts. The court date was set for January. In the meantime, the evidence continued to pile up. Detective Kowalski's investigation uncovered something I hadn't even known to look for. My parents had taken out a life insurance policy on me when I was a child, same as they'd done for Garrett. But Garrett's policy had been cashed out when he turned 21 and the money given to him as a graduation gift to start his adult life. Mine had been cashed out when I was 19 while I was away at college. I'd never received the money. When confronted about this, my parents claimed through their lawyer that the money had been used for educational expenses, but my student loan records showed otherwise. If they'd had an extra $15,000 from the life insurance policy, why had I needed to take out loans? The pattern was undeniable. Every financial asset that was supposed to benefit me had been redirected to Garrett or to my parents themselves. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. The preliminary hearing in December was my first time seeing my parents since that dinner at Rosewood Inn. They sat on the other side of the courtroom with their lawyer, both of them looking older somehow. My mother wore a conservative navy suit, pearls, her silver hair styled perfectly. My father was in his typical blazer and tie, his expression stoic. They didn't look at me. Not once. Garrett wasn't there. He wasn't charged yet, though Valerie Kincaid had made it clear she was still building the case for receiving stolen property. The hearing was procedural, just establishing that there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. The judge, when she got to the recording, she paused. When she got to the recording, she paused and asked to hear it played in court. The bailiff set up the audio system. My phone was entered into evidence, and then my mother's voice filled the courtroom. "We kept you out of obligation, son. Not because we wanted another child. We thought it was the right thing to do." I watched my mother's face as her own words played back. She didn't flinch, didn't show any emotion at all. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, as if this was happening to someone else. Justice Winters was silent for a long moment after the recording ended. Then she spoke, her voice careful and controlled. "I'm going to be candid. In 30 years on the bench, I've seen a lot of financial crime, embezzlement, fraud, theft. But this is one of the coldest cases I've encountered. Not because of the money. I've seen people steal much more. But because of the deliberateness, the planning, the forgery, and the apparent lack of remorse." She looked at my parents. "There is more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. The defendant's bail is continued. Trial is set for March 15th. She paused. "I will say this, though it's not my place. Whatever your justifications, whatever your reasoning, you have destroyed your relationship with your son. Money can be repaid, sentences can be served, but trust, once broken this completely, can never be restored. I hope it was worth it." My parents' lawyer stood immediately. "Your Honor, my clients maintain their innocence and look forward to presenting their side of the story at trial." Justice Winters gave him a look that could have frozen fire. "I'm sure they do. This hearing is adjourned." Walking out of the courthouse, Theodore put a hand on my shoulder. "That was good for us. The judge is clearly sympathetic to your position." "Will it matter at trial?" I asked. "Different judge will hear the case. Justice Winters only handles preliminary hearings, but the evidence speaks for itself. We're in a strong position." That night, my Aunt Carolyn called again. This time she was crying before she even said hello. "I confronted your mother," she said. "I told her I knew the truth, that I knew what they'd done to you. Do you know what she said to me? What? She said, "It's none of your business, Carolyn. This is between our immediate family." Like stealing from her own child was just a private matter. Like the fact that I'd believed her lies for years didn't matter. Aunt Carolyn's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, David. I should have questioned it. I should have reached out to you years ago, made sure you were okay. I just accepted the family narrative that Garrett was the golden child, and you were less. I'm ashamed." "It's not your fault," I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure that was entirely true. How many people had seen the disparity and said nothing? How many had noticed that I was treated differently and assumed I deserved it? "I'm testifying for you," she said suddenly. "If they need character witnesses or anything, I'll testify about what your mother told me, about how she lied. I'll tell them everything." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She was the first family member to choose my side. The only one. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone in my apartment, ordering Chinese food and watching movies. I'd been invited to spend it with friends, but I didn't want to be around other people's happy families. I didn't want to make small talk and pretend I was fine. On Christmas morning, I got a text from an unknown number. "This is Garrett. I know you blocked my other numbers. I'm asking you one last time to drop this. Mom's health is failing from the stress. Dad's reputation is destroyed. You've made your point. Let it go, and we can try to move forward as a family." I stared at the text for a long time. Then I wrote back, "You got $85,000 that belonged to me. Money that Grandma specifically left for me. You knew I never received my share of the inheritance, and you said nothing. You participated in the lie. I'm not dropping anything. See you in court." He didn't respond. January and February passed in a blur of preparation. Depositions, evidence review, meeting with Valerie Kincaid to go over my testimony. She was meticulous, aggressive, determined. "They're going to try to paint you as vindictive," she warned me. "As a failure who's lashing out at successful parents. You need to stay calm, stay factual. Don't let them make you emotional." "I am emotional," I said. "They stole from me. They told me I was unwanted. How am I supposed to not be emotional?" "You can be emotional. Just don't be reactive. Tell the truth, stick to the facts, and let the evidence do the work." The trial started on a cold morning in March, where the courthouse was packed. Apparently, my family's implosion was the most interesting thing happening in our small city. Reporters lined the hallway. I kept my head down and followed Theodore inside. Jury selection took 2 days. We ended up with 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 68. Valerie said it was a good jury for us. Several parents who might understand the violation of a parent stealing from their own child. Opening statements were stark. Valerie laid out the case methodically: the trust fund, the forged signature, the money trail, the recording. She played the restaurant audio for the jury, and I watched their faces. Several of them looked shocked. One older woman put her hand over her mouth. My parents' lawyer, a slick defense attorney named Gregory Vaughn, and argued that this was a misunderstanding between loving parents and an ungrateful son, that the money had been used for my benefit, that the signature question was a technicality, that families handle money informally all the time. "David Reeves wants to criminalize his parents for making financial decisions in his best interest," Vaughn said. "He's upset that his older brother was more successful, more accomplished, and he's using the legal system to settle personal scores. This is a family matter that should never have come to court." The first week of trial was all expert testimony. Dr. Helen Morrissey, the forensic document examiner, testified about the forged signature. She was unshakable on cross-examination, calmly explaining why she was certain the signature wasn't mine. And the bank representatives testified about the trust dissolution and where the money had gone. The paper trail was clear, undeniable. $170,000 from my trust to my parents' account to Garrett and various expenses. Detective Kowalski testified about the investigation, about how my parents' story had changed multiple times. First, they'd said I'd authorized the trust dissolution. Then, they'd said they'd done it to help me with debt. Then, they'd said it was for educational expenses. The story shifted depending on what they thought would sound most sympathetic. Week 2 was when I had to testify. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to my own execution. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. I was sworn in and took my seat. Valerie started gently, establishing who I was, my relationship with my family, my education and career. And then she got to the heart of it. "Can you tell the jury about the dinner at Rosewood Inn?" I took a breath and told them everything. Garrett's comment about me being a mistake, my parents agreeing, the recording I'd made, She played it again for the jury, and I had to sit there and listen to my own humiliation broadcast in a courtroom full of strangers. How did that make you feel? Valerie asked. Objection, Vaughn said. Relevance. This is a theft case, not a therapy session. Your Honor, the recording establishes the defendant's state of mind and motive, Valerie countered. It shows a pattern of treating one child as less valuable than the other, which directly relates to the financial crimes we're discussing. I'll allow it, the judge said. Judge Richard Novak was presiding, a no-nonsense man in his late 50s with a reputation for running a tight courtroom. I looked at the jury. It made me realize that my entire life had been a lie. I'd thought my family dynamic was normal, that the differences in treatment between me and Garrett were just natural. But hearing them say it out loud, that I was unwanted, that I was kept out of obligation, it clarified everything. And it made me start looking at other things, like where my trust fund had gone. Valerie walked me through the discovery of the trust, the realization that it had been stolen, the forged signature. I testified about never receiving my grandmother's inheritance, about the life insurance policy I'd never known was cashed out, about the pattern of financial disparity that had lasted my entire life. On cross-examination, Vaughn tried to rattle me. Isn't it true, Mr. Reeves, that you've always been jealous of your brother? No. Come on, he's a successful lawyer, married, owns a beautiful home. You're a graphic designer living in a one-bedroom apartment, single, struggling financially. You don't resent him even a little? I didn't until I found out he got half my inheritance on top of his own. Vaughn smiled like he'd scored a point. So you do resent him. I resent that he took money that wasn't his. That's not jealousy, that's just facts. He tried a different angle. You recorded your family without their knowledge at that dinner. Isn't that a violation of trust? They violated my trust when they stole $170,000 from me. Allegedly stole. The jury hasn't determined that yet. The money left my trust account and went to them. That's not alleged. That's documented. Vaughn was getting frustrated. You're estranged from your family now, correct? You don't speak to them? Correct. And before this alleged theft, were you close? I thought about how to answer that, honestly. I thought we were, but I was working with incomplete information. I didn't know they considered me a mistake. I didn't know they'd been systematically giving my brother financial advantages I never received. So no, in retrospect, we were never close. I just didn't realize it. Isn't it possible that your parents used the trust money for legitimate purposes? That they were trying to help you? If they were trying to help me, why didn't they tell me about it? Why forge my signature? Why give half of it to Garrett? Why lie about it when questioned? Vaughn didn't have a good answer for that. He moved on to questions about my relationship with my parents, trying to establish that I was a difficult child, that I'd always been resentful, that this was a pattern. But I stayed calm, stayed factual, and let the evidence speak. My parents testified in their own defense. My mother went first, dressed in a soft gray suit, looking fragile and elderly in a way I'd never seen her look before. She testified that they dissolved the trust because I'd come to them in crisis, drowning in debt, desperate for help, that I'd begged them to handle it quietly because I was ashamed, that they'd paid off my debts and used the remaining money for family expenses I'd benefited from. It was such a complete fabrication that I almost admired the audacity. Valerie destroyed her on cross-examination. Mrs. Reeves, you testified that your son came to you in financial crisis. When was this? It must have been early 2021. March 2021, when the trust was dissolved? Around then, yes. Can you describe this conversation? Where it took place? What was said? My mother hesitated. It was at our house, I believe. David was very upset, very emotional. He said he couldn't handle his debts anymore. What debts specifically did he mention? Credit cards, I think. Possibly medical bills. Valerie pulled out my credit report. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit M into evidence. This is David Reeves' credit report from 2021. It shows no credit card debt, no medical debt, no delinquencies of any kind. Mrs. Reeves, if your son was drowning in credit card debt in March 2021, why doesn't his credit report show any evidence of that? My mother's composure slipped. I'm not sure. Perhaps he doesn't remember it correctly. It was a stressful time. Or perhaps it never happened, Valerie said flatly. Perhaps you're lying to this jury to justify stealing from your own son. Objection! Vaughn was on his feet. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Novak said. Rephrase, Ms. Kincaid. Valerie smiled slightly. Mrs. Reeves, can you provide any evidence, any text messages, emails, bank statements, anything that proves your son came to you asking for financial help in 2021? It was a verbal conversation. How convenient. No evidence of the conversation that supposedly justified dissolving a $170,000 trust fund. Let's talk about the signature on the dissolution form. But you just said the conversation was about the trust dissolution. No. David must have signed it. When? Where? Do you remember him signing it? He must have signed it when we discussed the trust dissolution. But you just said the conversation was verbal. You didn't mention him signing paperwork. My mother looked flustered. I'm not sure of the exact sequence of events. It was years ago. 3 years ago. And yet, you remember your son coming to you in crisis, remember him begging for help, but you don't remember him actually signing the legal documents to dissolve his trust? Does that seem credible to you, Mrs. Reeves? The jury was watching my mother with undisguised skepticism. She'd lost them. My father's testimony was similar. Vague stories about me needing help, claims that they'd acted in my best interest. My insistence that the signature must have been legitimate because why would we forge it? But he couldn't explain the money going to Garrett. He couldn't explain the life insurance policy. He couldn't explain the decades of financial disparity that I'd documented. The prosecution rested after my father's testimony. The defense called character witnesses, people from church who testified that my parents were good people, longtime friends who said they'd never seen evidence of favoritism. But none of them could explain the financial records. None of them could account for the forged signature. Closing arguments were powerful. Valerie Kincaid stood in front of the jury and laid it out simply. This case is about two things, facts and feelings. The feelings are complicated, family dynamics, sibling rivalry, parental disappointment. The defense wants you to get lost in those feelings, to think this is just a dysfunctional family airing private grievances. But the facts are simple. David Reeves had a trust fund worth $170,000. His parents dissolved that trust fund by forging his signature. They took the money, half went to his brother, the rest went to themselves and their expenses. David never authorized this. David never received the money. That's theft. That's forgery. And the recording you heard, the one where Mrs. Reeves says they kept David out of obligation, not desire, that's motive. That's proof that they saw one son as valuable and the other as disposable. So they took from the disposable one to give to the valuable one. This isn't complicated. It's just cruel. Gregory Vaughn's closing was all emotion. He painted me as vindictive, as ungrateful, as weaponizing the legal system against loving parents who'd made difficult financial decisions in my best interest. But his argument kept circling back to intentions and feelings because the facts weren't on his side. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. I spent that time in a witness room with Theodore, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything. My phone was off. I didn't want to see the social media commentary, the speculation, the hot takes on my family's public destruction. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs barely supported me. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman who'd been taking detailed notes throughout the trial, handed the verdict form to the judge. Judge Novak reviewed it silently, then looked at my parents. Will the defendants please rise? My parents stood. My mother's hand was shaking. In the case of the state versus Anne and Robert Reeves, on the count of theft by deception, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted, reporters scrambling for their phones, spectators murmuring, my mother making a sound like a wounded animal. I sat frozen, Theodore's hand on my shoulder, unable to process what I just heard. Guilty. They'd been found guilty. My parents were criminals. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, my parents were released on bail, ordered to have no contact with me, and required to surrender their passports. Walking out of the courthouse, I was swarmed by reporters. David, how do you feel about the verdict? Are you reconciling with your family? Do you regret pressing charges? Theodore pushed through them, getting me to his car. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before I finally spoke. Is it wrong that I don't feel happy? He glanced at me. What do you feel? Tired. Empty. Like I've won something that wasn't worth winning. That's normal, Theodore said. You didn't want to destroy your parents. You wanted them to love you. The verdict doesn't give you that. It just confirms that they didn't. He was right. That night, alone in my apartment, I let myself cry for the first time since this whole thing started. Not tears of victory or vindication, but grief. Grief for the family I'd never really had. For the parents who'd never wanted me. Oh, for the childhood I'd spent trying to earn love that was never going to be given. Sentencing came in late April. The courtroom was packed again. Valerie Kincaid recommended significant prison time, 3 to 5 years for my mother, 4 to 6 for my father, who she argued had been the primary architect of the scheme. My parents' lawyer argued for probation, restitution, community service. He painted them as elderly, first-time offenders who'd made a terrible mistake, but who'd already suffered enough through the public humiliation of the trial. Judge Novak listened to both sides, then delivered his sentence. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, you have been convicted of stealing from your own son. Not just money, but trust, security, and the sense that family is supposed to be a safe place. What the evidence showed a pattern of favoritism and financial manipulation that lasted decades. You didn't just make one bad decision. You made hundreds of small decisions that added up to systematic theft and emotional abuse. I've read the victim impact statement from your son. I've seen the evidence of forged signatures and diverted funds. And I've listened to the recording where you casually dismiss him as an obligation rather than a child you chose to love. This court takes family crime seriously. When parents violate the fundamental duty to protect and nurture their children, when they exploit the power dynamic inherent in the parent-child relationship for financial gain, they undermine the very foundation of family structure. Therefore, I am sentencing Mrs. Ann Reeves to 3 years in state prison, albeit with eligibility for parole after 18 months. I am sentencing Mr. Robert Reeves to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 2 years. Additionally, you are jointly ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $170,000 plus interest, totaling $198,450, to be paid to David Reeves. You will have no contact with your son unless he initiates it. This sentence begins immediately. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing. My father sat rigid, his face expressionless. The bailiffs came to take them away, and I watched my parents being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. It should have felt like victory. It just felt like loss. A week after sentencing, Garrett was arrested. The DA had finally put together enough evidence to charge him with receiving stolen property. The $85,000 transfer was clear, when they'd found emails between Garrett and our parents discussing David's share that he'd allegedly forfeited by being financially irresponsible. The emails made it clear Garrett knew the money wasn't supposed to be his. His trial was set for September. I didn't plan to attend. I testified at the preliminary hearing, given them everything they needed. I was done being in courtrooms, done watching my family destroy themselves. Garrett's firm suspended him pending the outcome of the trial. The local newspaper ran an editorial about families, money, and the corrosive effects of favoritism. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about my situation, about what I should have done, about whether I'd been right to pursue criminal charges. Some people called me a hero for standing up to family corruption. Others called me vindictive. Said I should have handled it privately. Said I destroyed my family over money. I stopped reading the comments. In June, I got a letter from my mother. It was forwarded through Theodore. She wasn't allowed to contact me directly. He called to ask if I wanted it. What does it say? I asked. I haven't read it. Attorney-client privilege doesn't extend to me opening your mail. But if you want my advice, you don't owe her anything. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. I thought about it. Part of me was desperate to read it, hoping for an apology, for acknowledgement, for some sign that she'd finally understood what she'd done. Another part of me knew that was unlikely. People like my mother didn't suddenly develop self-awareness in prison. Send it to me, I said. The letter arrived 3 days later, and I let it sit on my kitchen table for a week before I finally opened it. The handwriting was my mother's, still elegant despite being written on prison stationery. David, I am writing this against my lawyer's advice, but I feel you deserve to know the truth. Your father and I never meant to hurt you. We truly believed we were doing what was best for the family. Garrett showed more promise from the beginning. You have to understand, we had limited resources, and we made strategic decisions about how to invest in our children's futures. We thought Garrett would be the one to carry on the family legacy, to make us proud, to take care of us in our old age. You were always more difficult, more emotional, less driven. We didn't think you needed as much support because you seemed content with less. When we dissolved your trust, we genuinely believed the money would do more good helping Garrett establish his career and securing our retirement. We didn't think you'd find out. We certainly never imagined you'd pursue criminal charges against your own parents. What you've done to this family is unforgivable, David. You've destroyed your father's reputation, sent us both to prison, and torn apart our family over money. Money that we would have eventually passed down to you anyway when we died. You were always so impatient, so entitled. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished. You've lost your family. And for what? A verdict that everyone knows was driven by your resentment rather than justice. I'm writing this because I want you to know that I forgive you. Despite everything, you're still my son, Eddie, and I hope that someday you'll realize what you've done and find a way to make amends. Your mother. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. First, disbelief at the complete lack of self-awareness. Then, rage at the way she'd turned herself into the victim. Finally, a strange kind of peace. Because this letter proved something I'd needed to prove. I hadn't been wrong. They really did see me as less than. They really had stolen from me deliberately. And they still, even now, didn't think they'd done anything wrong. I saved the letter as evidence. Who knew if it would matter legally, but I didn't respond. What was there to say? In August, my Aunt Carolyn organized a small family gathering, not with my immediate family, but with extended relatives, cousins I'd lost touch with, aunts and uncles from both sides. She'd told everyone what had happened, the full truth, and several of them had reached out to me with apologies and support. The gathering was at Carolyn's house, just a backyard barbecue, nothing formal. I almost didn't go. But something made me show up, and I was glad I did. My cousin Julia, who I hadn't seen in years, pulled me aside. I just want you to know, I believe you, and I'm sorry we all looked the other way for so long. We could see that Garrett was the favorite, but we told ourselves it wasn't our business. That was wrong. Other relatives said similar things. My uncle Dennis, my mother's brother, told me he'd always thought my parents were too hard on me, but had never questioned it. I should have said something, he said. I should have stepped in. I failed you. These conversations didn't undo the damage, but they helped. And they confirmed that I wasn't crazy, that the favoritism had been visible to others, that my experience had been real. Garrett's trial in September ended in a plea deal. He pled guilty to receiving stolen property in exchange for 18 months probation, community service, and an order to repay the $85,000 to me. He avoided prison, but his legal career was effectively over. No firm would hire him with a criminal conviction. I heard through Carolyn that he'd moved to another state, was working in legal consulting, had lost most of his friends. His wife had filed for divorce. The golden child had fallen. By October, 6 months after my parents' sentencing, I'd started to rebuild. I'd gotten a better job, moved to a nicer apartment, started dating someone who didn't know anything about my family drama and seemed to like me for who I was rather than who I was supposed to be. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the years I'd spent trying to be good enough for my family. I'd started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned because my parents had always dismissed it as frivolous. Most importantly, I'd stopped waiting for my family to apologize, to acknowledge what they'd done, to love me the way I'd always wanted to be loved. I'd accepted that it was never going to happen. They were who they were, and I couldn't change that. All I could change was whether I let their dysfunction continue to define me. In December, almost a year after that dinner at Rosewood Inn, I got a message from a stranger on social media. Hi, David. I hope this doesn't seem weird, but I've been following your story in the news. I'm a family law attorney, and I've worked with dozens of clients over the years who've experienced similar dynamics, the golden child versus scapegoat pattern, financial manipulation, emotional abuse disguised as parenting. What you did, standing up for yourself and pursuing legal action, was incredibly brave. But more than that, it was educational. I've already had 3 clients come to me in the past 6 months who recognize their own situations in your story. They're now taking steps to protect themselves, to document the abuse, to set boundaries. I wanted you to know that your courage has rippled out in ways you probably don't realize. You've helped people you'll never meet. Thank you. I sat with that message for a long time. The pain had been worth something. Not because I'd gotten justice, though I had. Not because my parents were punished, though they were. But because my story had given other people permission to trust their own experiences, to stop gaslighting themselves, to recognize that they deserved better. 2 years after that dinner, I was invited to speak on a panel about family financial abuse. I almost said no. I didn't want to be defined by my trauma. Didn't want to be the poster child for dysfunctional families. But then I thought about that attorney's message, about the people who'd found recognition in my story. I said yes. Standing in front of a room full of people, telling my story again, I realized something. I wasn't that scared kid anymore, desperate for parental approval. I wasn't the scapegoat trying to prove my worth. I was just David. A person with a story, with scars, with hard-won wisdom. A person who'd survived. The question and answer session after my talk was intense. So many people with similar stories, similar patterns, similar pain. A woman in her 40s who just discovered her parents had stolen her inheritance to fund her brother's business. A man in his 50s who'd spent his entire life being compared unfavorably to his sister. A young woman, barely 20, who was just starting to recognize the emotional manipulation in her family. I gave them the same advice I'd wish someone had given me. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Know that you're not crazy. You're not oversensitive. You're not the problem. And understand that standing up for yourself might cost you the family you have, but it will give you the dignity you deserve. After the panel, a journalist approached me. She was writing a book about family dysfunction and wanted to interview me. I thought about my mother's letter about how she'd accused me of being vindictive, of tearing apart the family for money. I thought about Garrett's Facebook posts, painting me as the villain. Then I said yes, because my story deserved to be told accurately, and if it helped even one person recognize their own situation and get out sooner than I did, then all of it, the pain, the trial, the public exposure, the family destruction, would have meaning. 3 years after that dinner at Rosewood Inn, I got notification that the restitution had been paid in full. My parents had sold their house, liquidated their retirement accounts, and paid me back every penny of the stolen trust fund plus interest, $198,450. Oh, I'd been mine at 25, money that could have been mine at 25, money that could have changed the trajectory of my 20s. Now I was 31, and while the money was still significant, its absence had already shaped me. I'd learned to be self-sufficient. I'd learned to trust myself. I'd learned that I didn't need my family's approval to be worthy. The money didn't erase those lessons. It just confirmed them. I used part of it to pay off my student loans completely. I donated $25,000 to a nonprofit that helped young adults escaping abusive family situations. I put the rest in investments, thinking about the future I was building for myself. A future defined by my choices, not my family's expectations. My mother was released on parole after serving 19 months. My father was still in prison, wouldn't be eligible for parole for another 5 months. I heard through Carolyn that my mother was living in a small apartment, working part-time at a department store, that she'd aged dramatically during her time in prison. Carolyn asked if I wanted to see her. I said no, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once proven toxic, need to stay severed. My mother had written me twice more from prison, both times similar to the first letter. A mix of self-justification and veiled criticism, a complete inability to take responsibility. I'd saved them as evidence of her continued lack of remorse, but I'd never responded. What was the point? 4 years after that dinner, or I got married, not to anyone my family would have approved of. She was an artist, lived in a converted loft, made sculptures from recycled materials, believed in therapy and healing and growth. My family would have thought she was impractical, unfocused, not ambitious enough. I thought she was perfect. We got married in a small ceremony with the family I'd chosen, Aunt Carolyn and her kids, Uncle Dennis, a few cousins who'd stayed in touch, my close friends, my wife's loud, chaotic, loving family who'd welcomed me without question. No Garrett, no parents, no golden child, no scapegoat, no family dynamics that required me to be less than I was. Just people who loved me for being exactly who I was. During the ceremony, when it came time for the traditional parent dances, we did something different. I danced with Aunt Carolyn, always who'd stood by me when my own mother wouldn't. My wife danced with her mom, then invited me to join them, and we all three danced together, laughing, imperfect, whole. That's what family was supposed to be. Not obligation, not strategy, not investment and return. Just love, freely given, without conditions or calculations. On our honeymoon, my wife asked me if I ever regretted it, pursuing the charges, destroying my family, burning those bridges. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they put me in a position where I had to choose between my dignity and their approval. But I don't regret choosing myself. That's the first time I'd ever done that, and it changed everything. 5 years after that dinner at Rosewood Inn, the book came out. The journalist who'd interviewed me had written a comprehensive exploration of family financial abuse, and my story was featured prominently. She'd changed names, altered identifying details, but anyone who knew me would recognize the narrative. The book became a surprise bestseller. Suddenly, family financial abuse was a topic of conversation. Other people started coming forward with their stories. Support groups formed. Lawyers started specializing in helping adult children recover stolen inheritances. My story had become part of something bigger than myself, bigger than my family's dysfunction. It had become a catalyst for change. I did a few interviews, always anonymously, always focused on the broader issue rather than my specific situation. I talked about the scapegoat golden child dynamic, about how families use money to control and manipulate, about how hard it is to stand up to people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. One interviewer asked me what I'd say to my parents if I could say anything without consequences. I thought about it. I'd say thank you. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were. Thank you for teaching me that I deserved better. Thank you for pushing me hard enough that I finally pushed back. You meant to break me, and instead, you made me stronger. You meant to keep me small, and instead, you forced me to grow. You thought you could manipulate me forever, and instead, you set me free. So thank you for being such terrible parents that I had no choice but to become my own person. The interviewer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's not forgiveness." "No," I agreed. "It's not. Forgiveness would require them to acknowledge what they did, to show remorse, to change. They've done none of those things. This is just acceptance. Accepting that they are who they are and that I don't need them to be anything different anymore." 6 years after that dinner, my father died in prison. Heart attack, sudden, at age 68. I got the call from a prison chaplain who asked if I wanted to claim the body, make arrangements. I said no, let the state handle it. Garrett could deal with it if he wanted to. I didn't go to the funeral, I didn't send flowers, I didn't reach out to my mother, who was presumably devastated. I just let it be. My wife asked if I needed to talk about it. I told her the truth. I'd grieved my father years ago. I'd grieved the father I'd wished I had. The father who might have protected me. Who might have loved me. The man who died in prison was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. His death changed nothing for me. 7 years after that dinner at Rosewood Inn, I was having coffee with a friend when I saw Garrett. He was at a table across the cafe, looking older, tired, alone. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stood and walked over. "David," his voice was tentative. "Garrett, can I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair. My friend quietly excused himself, giving us space. Garrett sat down heavily. He'd aged badly, more gray hair than I remembered, deeper lines around his eyes, a defeated slump to his shoulders. "I heard about the book," he said. "I read it. I knew it was about us." I didn't confirm or deny, just waited. "I'm sorry." The words came out quietly. "I'm sorry for all of it. For that night at the restaurant, for taking the money, for not standing up for you when we were kids, for everything." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation, of strategy, of the same old Garrett trying a new angle, but all I saw was exhaustion and what looked like genuine regret. "Okay," I said. "That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Garrett? That I forgive you? That we can be brothers again? That's not how this works." He nodded slowly. "I know. I wanted you to know that I see it now. The whole golden child thing, the way Mom and Dad treated you. I benefited from it, and I never questioned it, because why would I? I was getting everything I wanted. But after the trial, after losing everything, I had a lot of time to think, and I realized that you were right. They were wrong. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." "Are you in therapy?" I asked. He looked surprised. "Yeah, actually. Court ordered at first, but I've kept going. It's helped." "Good. Keep going. Work on yourself. Build a life that doesn't require you to step on someone else to feel tall." I stood up. "I hope things get better for you, Garrett. I really do. But we're not going to be brothers again. That ship sailed a long time ago." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something stopped him. Maybe growth, maybe therapy, maybe just exhaustion. "I understand," he said. "Take care of yourself, David." "You too." I walked out of the cafe without looking back. Today, nearly 8 years after that dinner at Rosewood Inn, I'm sitting in my home office working on a freelance design project. Through the window, I can see my wife in the garden. Mom, what kind I don't want to be. I haven't what kind I don't want to be. I haven't spoken to my mother in those 8 years. She sent letters occasionally, always the same mix of self-pity and blame. I stopped opening them after the third one. Garrett has reached out twice more, always brief messages checking in, respecting my boundaries. I respond politely, but distantly. Some relationships can't be repaired, and that's okay. My chosen family has grown. More cousins, more friends, my wife's extended family who treat me like I've always been one of them. I have people who celebrate my successes without resentment, who support me in failures without judgment, who love me not because they have to, but because they want to. And the money from the restitution has been invested well. It's grown. It'll be enough to give my future children a good start in life, to pay for their education, to help them launch their adult lives. But more importantly, I'll give them something my parents never gave me: unconditional love. The knowledge that they're wanted, not obligated. The security of knowing that their worth isn't measured against their siblings, that there's no competition for affection, that love isn't a finite resource that has to be rationed. Sometimes people ask me if I won, if destroying my family, sending my parents to prison, getting the money back, if that constituted victory. I tell them the truth. I didn't win. I survived. There's a difference. Winning implies there was something to gain, but there wasn't. I lost my family, my sense of belonging, and the comforting lie that I'd been loved all along. What I gained was harder to quantify, but infinitely more valuable: self-respect. The knowledge that I wouldn't accept mistreatment, even from people I loved. The understanding that I deserved better. The courage to demand it. That dinner at Rosewood Inn changed everything, not because of what my family said, though that was the catalyst, but because of what I chose to do afterward. I could have swallowed it, accepted it, continued being the scapegoat because it was easier than fighting. Instead, I chose myself. And that choice, that single decision to trust my instincts and protect my dignity, that's what set me free. They thought I was a mistake, an obligation, someone who could be manipulated, controlled, used. They were wrong. I was the one who got away. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.